On February 26, 1987, Audrey Marie Hilly was found muddy and incoherent in a backyard outside Anniston, Alabama. Police Lieutenant Gary Carroll was the last person she ever saw before she passed out.
She was found in this yard here. Her hair was wet with mud and her clothes were wet. Called her name and she opened her eyes and looked at me and then rolled her eyes back. As far as I know, that was her last conscious moment.
Marie Hilly succumbed to hypothermia just 3 hours after being admitted to the hospital.
She was attractive, charming, outgoing, friendly, probably the results of being sociopathic. We now know that.
However, the surprising twist in the story is that she wasn't a victim of the cold. Rather, a mysterious disease became the reason for a nationwide manhunt. What was this mysterious disease, and how did it lead to such a dramatic turn of events? It all started in Blue Mountain, a small community based in Anniston, Alabama. It's known for its scenic beauty, with lush greenery and a serene atmosphere. This tranquil setting is a stark contrast to the dramatic events that unfolded here, particularly the discovery of Marie Hilly in distress on a back deck. The caring residents of Blue Mountain were quick to respond, calling the police and an ambulance to assist the woman. This incident became a focal point in this complex and intriguing story. But to go back to the very beginning, in the early 1900s in this small town, there were two residents, Huey Frazier and Lucille Meads, who were deeply in love with each other. They were no different from everyone else when it came to working hard. Both came from families that relied on the local mills for their livelihood. When they got married in January 1932, they were already accustomed to the demanding hours required to make ends meet during the tough times of the Great Depression in Alabama. A year later, their daughter Audrey Marie was born on June 4, 1933. Lucille Frazier knew she couldn't stay home to take care of the child, so she went back to her job at the linen thread company as soon as she could. They relied on family members to look after little Marie while they worked long hours at their jobs. Marie spent most of her time with her cousins and grandmother while her parents worked. She was the youngest among her cousins, and even though most of them were boys, Marie didn't let them push her around. In fact, she was tough and earned their respect from a very young age. Despite her toughness, Marie was still a sweet, girly girl who loved wearing beautiful and expensive dresses. She had big ambitions and always wanted to improve her social status. Growing up, she was very popular and even part of the popular social circle of kids. Her drive and confidence stayed with her throughout her life. The Frazier family adored Marie, but they were also practical. Times were tough, and Huey and Lucille couldn't rely on a single income to meet all their family's needs. They appreciated the support of their families and trusted them to take care of Marie, but to make up for the time they couldn't spend with Marie, they often spoiled her with love and attention. Even though the Fraziers had financial difficulties and didn't have much money, they made sure to buy Marie nice dresses and clothes. This was unusual for kids her age, especially during that time. Her parents believed that Marie had a brighter future ahead than they did. They proudly predicted that she wouldn't have to work in the mills for many years like they did. Instead, they dreamed that she'd graduate from high school and become a secretary. Which might sound like a simple goal, but in the context of their times and surroundings, it was a big dream. In their community, most girls didn't get more than a grade school education before starting to work at the linen thread mill. But Marie was seen as different and special, and her parents made sure to tell her that she could achieve more in life. In 1945, when Marie was 12 years old, the Fraziers moved from Blue Mountain to Anniston, which was close by but socially different. Anniston had its own upper class, made up of the owners of the mills and factories where Marie's relatives had always worked. At her new school, Quintard Junior High, Marie mingled with privileged children and made friends among them. She took her studies seriously, and her classmates admired her maturity and intelligence. Marie was also known for being pretty and well-dressed, and by the end of her 7th grade year, she was named the prettiest girl at Quintard by the Anniston High School yearbook staff. Marie continued to do well in Anniston High School. She even joined clubs like the Future Teachers of America and the Commercial Club, which was for girls interested in secretarial careers. Her dedication and maturity made her stand out among her classmates as a dependable and thoughtful girl. And because she was so attractive, every boy wanted to be her friend, and she too enjoyed the attention. It was during this time that she met Frank Hilly, the love of her life. Frank came from a family in Anniston, Alabama, where the men worked in the pipe-making industry.
From my understanding, he was a hard worker, family man. I've never heard anybody say anything unkind about him. So apparently he was just an average guy.
His parents, Clarence and Carrie Hilly, had a loving and close-knit family. While they may not have had a lot of material wealth, they had a lot of love to give. Frank, alongside with his two sisters, Frida and Jewel, grew up in this caring environment. He met Marie when she was 12 years old and he was a junior in high school. As time passed, he fell deeply in love with her. Marie decided to reciprocate Frank's affection, even though her parents didn't approve of their relationship. Frank might not have come from one of the wealthy families in Anniston, but he treated Marie with great care and respect, making her feel special and cherished. When Frank joined the Navy after finishing high school, he missed Marie terribly and eagerly anticipated the day when they could be together again. Fearing they might drift apart, they got married when Frank was on leave on May 8, 1951. Marie, however, stayed in Anniston to finish her education while Frank completed his naval service in Long Beach, California. After her graduation, Marie joined Frank in California, and they later moved together when he was reassigned to Boston in 1952. At the end of Frank's Navy service, they discovered that Marie was pregnant, so they decided to move back to their hometown, Anniston. There, they purchased a small home to begin their life together. Frank found work in the shipping department at Standard Foundry, a local company, while Marie pursued her career as a secretary. Finally, on November 11, 1953, Marie welcomed a baby boy into the world and named him Michael Hilly. Little Michael, or Mike for short, was raised just like his mother. He often spent time with his grandmother while Marie and Frank worked hard to provide for their family. But things took a turn for the worse when Marie had a disagreement with one of her coworkers, which led to her losing her job. She believed that some female colleagues had gone behind her back to get her fired. Tensions in the Hilly family started to escalate during this time. Frank's drinking habits were becoming more problematic. Frank had recently received a job promotion, and he often hung out with his coworkers after work to drink. Sometimes their wives and kids would also join these get-togethers, but it wasn't always a pleasant scene. One night in particular, Frank had too much to drink and ended up vomiting outside the family car. This triggered a big fight between him and Marie. Frank, in a drunken state, lay on the ground and suggested that Marie should run him over with the car if she was so angry. Shockingly, Marie actually attempted to hit him with the car, but a friend intervened and stopped her. Their marriage was strained further when Marie and Frank experienced a miscarriage. However, in the 1960s, things seemed to improve after Marie became pregnant again and gave birth to a daughter named Carol in 1960. On the surface, the Hilly family appeared to be the ideal American family with well-behaved children. Yet, there were some hidden issues. Marie clearly favored her son Mike and didn't show the same love and care for Carol. She had higher expectations for her, which made her feel rejected and hurt. As a result, Carol began rebelling against her mother. Marie had always been an excellent student and popular while growing up. However, Carol faced difficulties in school, and this disappointed Marie greatly. As a result, Marie became cold and controlling towards Carol. She tried to dictate what Carol wore and who she spent time with. During that period, Carol was also exploring her own feelings. She discovered that she was more interested in women than men. However, she was aware that her mother would never approve of this, so she did her best to keep this aspect of herself hidden. On the other hand, Marie had a strong desire to be seen as the most attractive and popular person, and she believed that social status was extremely important. She was what some might call a social climber, someone who did everything they could to improve their social standing. Marie tried hard to befriend wealthy people because she thought it would make her appear wealthy and gain respect in society. But that wasn't all. Marie's desire for status went further. She developed a serious spending problem. She frequently purchased expensive clothing from high-end stores and wanted to make costly renovations on their home to keep up with their more affluent friends and neighbors. However, the Hilly family lived in a working-class neighborhood, and it was unusual for people there to spend so extravagantly. Even though the family didn't have the income to support Marie's lavish spending, Frank couldn't bring himself to say no to her. However, the money needed to come from somewhere, though, and Marie's desire for money led her to a troubling path. She began taking out loans in Frank's name by convincing multiple loan officers to lend her money. When she maxed out on one loan, she'd simply move on to another lender. Despite her excessive spending, Marie's appetite for luxury remained insatiable. She often complained to Frank that she felt unloved, portraying him as a bad husband, and believed her kids didn't care about her. This financial deceit and emotional turmoil strained their family even further. Being frustrated and tired of the daily drama caused by Marie, Mike decided to distance himself from the family after completing college. He got married to Terry Henderson and relocated to Florida, seeking a fresh start away from the turmoil. However, this left Carol alone to cope with her difficult mother. It was a challenging situation for her, but she found comfort and support in the friendship of Sonia Marcel Gibson, which made things a little bit easier to bear for her. They both were close friends who often spent time together. For Carol, escaping her challenging home life with Marie was always a relief. However, in February 1974, things took a terrible turn when Sonia fell seriously ill with a high fever and such weak legs that she couldn't even walk. Sonia's lips and fingernails even turned blue, indicating a severe problem. They rushed her to the hospital in Anniston, but her condition had already deteriorated significantly by the time they arrived. The doctors acted swiftly and called for an emergency helicopter to rush Sonia to a different hospital in Birmingham for more intensive treatment. Sadly, Sonia's condition only worsened, and she passed away before reaching the hospital. Losing such a close friend was a devastating blow for Carol, and it plunged her into a deep depression. Surprisingly, Marie, her own mother, offered no comfort during this difficult time. As time passed, Carol's grief began to ease, and life slowly moved forward. Little did they know, that was just the start of more painful events which were on the horizon. On November 28, 1974, on Thanksgiving Day, Frank got 5 tickets to a football game, so he invited his son Mike, Mike's wife Terry, and Terry's parents to join him. However, during the game, Frank decided to talk to Mike about something that had been bothering him. He explained that his marriage with Marie wasn't going well. They were constantly arguing, and he believed there was something seriously wrong with her. Frank described how Marie would stay awake all night, trembling with fear, and he always struggled to comfort her. To make matters worse, Marie claimed she was receiving love letters from local men, which deeply troubled Frank. Her extravagant spending habits were another concern. Frank tried to scold her for excessive spending, but it didn't have any effect. Marie had a taste for luxury and wanted to buy expensive things right away. To hide her spending from Frank, she rented a post office box and had some bills sent there instead of their home address. Additionally, she also started taking out loans. In their small town of Anniston, where they were well respected, local businesses gave Marie credit because Frank had always paid their bills on time. However, when Marie's account started to become overdue, creditors alerted Frank about the issue, and he was now facing the consequences. It was about this time that year that Frank's appearance and health raised concerns when he met a friend in town. His friend noticed that Frank looked unwell, paler, and thinner than usual. Worried, he asked Frank if everything was all right, and Frank assured him that he was okay, but also shared that he'd been suffering from painful headaches and nausea for a few weeks. He'd already visited a doctor, but they couldn't identify the cause of his symptoms, so he believed that over-the-counter aspirins and regular medication would help him recover soon. However, the reality turned out to be more serious than Frank initially thought. A few months later, Mike and Terry received the good news that they were expecting a baby. Excited, Frank called Mike and mentioned that he wanted to drop off some maternity clothes for Terry. However, the day Frank was supposed to bring the maternity clothes for Terry, Mike received a call from Marie, who explained that Frank was experiencing stomach issues that day and wouldn't be able to meet up as planned. But a few days later, Frank and Mike met up again for a round of golf, and that's when Frank revealed a shocking incident. He explained that on May 16, 1975, he'd experienced severe stomach cramps while at work, feeling physically drained. So he left work early and arrived home earlier than usual. To his astonishment, he found Marie in a compromising position with her boss, Walter Clinton, right there in their bedroom. This revelation left Mike completely shocked because he never expected his mother to engage in such behavior. Frank explained that after discovering Marie's affair, they never really talked about it because he wanted to avoid any further arguments with Marie. Mike wanted to hear more about it, and they planned to meet the next day since Frank had the day off. However, the following day, Mike received another call from Marie, informing him that Frank was unwell once again and couldn't join him. This was when Frank's health started deteriorating rapidly. His health took a turn for the worst over the weekend, with severe symptoms like vomiting, diarrhea, and stomach pain. His fever had gone away, but he still had a lot of pain in his stomach. He became so confused and disoriented that he had to go to the hospital, and the doctors there said he had a problem with his liver, and they gave him some medicines to help his digestion. But even after resting at home for a few days, Frank's health didn't get any better. On the morning of Friday, May 23, 1975, at around 3:30 a.m., Marie woke up and noticed that her husband wasn't in bed. She looked all around the house and couldn't find him, but when she went outside, she saw Frank standing in the front yard wearing only his underwear. He seemed really confused and was wandering around aimlessly. Marie realized that something was seriously wrong with Frank, more than just being sick, so she quickly took him to the hospital, but by this time, his skin had turned yellow and he had very little energy left to move. As Frank's condition began to worsen, he was becoming more delirious. There was a moment when he thought he was at his office desk and tried to write on his bed sheets with an imaginary pen. Marie, deeply concerned about Frank's health, called their son Mike and explained that the doctors were struggling to figure out what was wrong with Frank, and if he didn't improve soon, he might not survive. After getting the news, 2 days later, on May 25, 1975, Mike arrived at the hospital to meet his father. When he went into Frank's room, he found his mother sleeping in a chair, and his father was still resting in bed. Sadly, soon Mike realized that his father had passed away in his sleep at the age of 45. Marie was completely shattered by this news. An autopsy which was conducted with Marie's permission showed that Frank died from kidney failure. The doctors believed that this kidney failure was caused by infectious hepatitis, a severe liver infection. However, it was still a mystery how Frank might have caught this virus. But it didn't stop there. After Frank passed away, Mike's wife, Terry, also fell ill. At the beginning, she thought it was just regular morning sickness because she was pregnant. However, Marie, her mother-in-law, insisted on taking care of her. Terry was so unwell that she didn't feel like eating much, but Marie was determined that Terry needed to eat for the baby's health. Marie used to prepare soup and other dishes for Terry and made sure she finished it all. But despite this, Terry's condition kept getting worse, and she grew incredibly weak. So Marie didn't waste any time and took Terry to the hospital. After observing Terry's terrible condition, the doctors were concerned that she might have caught hepatitis from Frank before he passed away. The doctors wanted to give Terry a shot to treat hepatitis, but they were worried and had to make sure it wouldn't harm the baby growing inside her. So they needed to consult with Terry's gynecologist to ensure it was safe, but Marie volunteered to make that call for Terry. She got in touch with the gynecologist and relayed the message to the hospital that it was okay to proceed with the shot. After the injection, Terry's condition started to improve, and the doctors eventually allowed her to leave the hospital. After a brief improvement, Terry's health took a turn for the worse when she returned to Marie's house. She became sick again and had to go back to the hospital. Sadly, this time, she experienced a miscarriage which broke her deeply. During this time, Terry ended up in the hospital a total of 4 times. In response, Mike didn't waste any time further, and he and Terry moved back to Florida, and Marie couldn't prevent them from leaving. At this point, Marie found herself drowning in unpaid bills, which had reached a staggering amount. However, in a stroke of luck for Marie, she found that Frank had life insurance worth $31,000, so she used a portion of this money to clear some of her outstanding debts, but most of it still went towards maintaining her image and lifestyle. Even after her husband's passing, Marie couldn't reduce her extravagant spending habits. She purchased a new car and went on a shopping spree, buying lots of new clothes to maintain her outward image. However, she did use a portion of the money for her family's needs as well. She bought her mother, Lucille, a shiny new diamond ring, gifted Mike a whole bunch of expensive suits, and even got Carol a brand new car when she became old enough to drive. However, while everyone else in the family was in mourning, Marie seemed strangely unaffected by Frank's passing. Carol especially was deeply saddened by losing her father, and she really needed her mother's emotional support during this tough time. But instead of offering comfort and a shoulder to cry on, Marie tried to make Carol feel better by giving her expensive gifts. She believed that these material possessions would bring Carol the same kind of happiness they brought to her. Around this time, Lucille, Marie's mother, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and Marie stepped up to take care of her mother. Part of Lucille's treatment involved receiving injections, and Marie was the one administering them. She used to give Lucille injections that actually weren't prescribed by the doctor, but when questioned about these injections, Marie claimed that Lucille's doctor had authorized them. However, the question soon arose about what these injections were actually for, because Lucille's health was only getting worse day by day. While Lucille was admitted to the hospital, Marie started confiding in Frank's sister, Frida, and shared her feelings of paranoia that everyone was conspiring against her. Marie also complained about difficulties at work and mentioned experiencing strange occurrences in her life. This set the stage for a growing sense of unease and suspicion surrounding Marie's actions and behavior. Marie revealed that she'd been receiving some unsettling phone calls for a few days, but when she answered them, no one spoke on the other end, which frightened her. One evening, when she returned home late, she discovered her kitchen drawers were wide open, which made her believe that someone had broken into her house in search of something. Concerned about Marie's safety and the strange occurrences, Frida felt it was crucial to inform Mike about what was happening with his mother so he could take steps to address these issues and ensure his mother's well-being. So after speaking with Marie and seeing how scared his mother was due to these strange occurrences, Mike made a decision. He and his wife Terry moved back to Anniston to live with Marie, Carol, and Lucille, Mike's grandmother, temporarily. Mike also found a job in a ministry in Anniston to support his family. However, again living together with Marie became tense for everyone, especially for Terry, so Mike thought it would be better for him and Terry to move to a nearby apartment complex for some peace and space. However, Marie didn't like this idea and felt abandoned, but Mike believed it would be beneficial for everyone's well-being. But the night before Mike and Terry were all set to move into their new apartment, there was a surprising fire at Marie's house. Luckily, it happened when no one was at home, as Mike and Terry were at church, Carol was with a friend, and Marie and Lucille were out for a drive. A watchful neighbor spotted smoke coming from the house and quickly dialed 911 to report it. The fire caused quite a bit of damage, so Marie, Carol, and Lucille had to move in with Mike and Terry in their new place. It was an unexpected turn of events that brought them all together temporarily. After living together for about a month, Marie's house was finally safe to return to. However, in a strange twist of events, just as Marie, Carol, and Lucille were about to move out of their apartment, another fire happened. This time it was in the apartment right next to Mike, and the smoke from that fire seeped into Mike's unit and caused a lot of damage. So, once more, they had to go back to living with Marie in her house. What's even more puzzling was that no one could figure out how these fires started. It was unclear if it was all a coincidence or if something more sinister was at play. By 1977, there was a police officer named Lieutenant Gary Carroll who got to know Marie quite well. Why? Because Marie kept calling the Anniston police station regularly. She kept telling them about bizarre things happening at her home. First, she said her house smelled like gas fumes, which was concerning. Then, a few days later, she called the police again, this time about a small fire that broke out in her closet. But here's the strange part. When the police rushed to her house, they found no signs of a break-in, and the fire also didn't really damage anything or harm anyone. This got the police suspicious and wondering why all these odd things seemed to be happening only to Marie. After the incident where Marie's house had those mysterious fires, she decided to sue the Alabama Gas Company for $75,000, thinking they were to blame. She didn't win the lawsuit, but did manage to get some money from her insurance to cover the damages. But here's where things got even stranger. Soon, it wasn't just Marie who was calling the Anniston police. Her neighbor, Doris Ford, who was also a widow with 3 sons, began making frequent calls too. Doris reported fires breaking out in her closet, not just once, but several times. The puzzling part was when the police came to investigate, they couldn't find any signs of a break-in, and the fires also didn't cause much damage. All these fire incidents were becoming very suspicious and hard for the police to explain. Over the next few weeks, Marie repeatedly called the police to report nuisance phone calls, break-ins, and even a scary, threatening note left on her doorstep. However, whenever the Anniston police came to her house, they never found any evidence of these incidents. Despite the strange nature of her complaints, Marie was known for her kindness. She'd always offer the police officers coffee and food as a gesture of gratitude for their help. The police found her complaints odd, but because Mary was such a pleasant person, they had no reason to doubt her sincerity or her intentions. Marie and Doris kept calling the police about these annoying daily phone calls. So the police now decided to trace these calls to find out who was behind them and why. But here's where the events get even more mysterious. Every time they tried to trace the calls, they magically stopped, and as soon as they stopped trying to trace them, the calls started again. Something really strange was going on, and eventually they managed to trace the calls from Doris's phone. They were shocked to find that the calls were coming from where Marie worked at Jenkins Manufacturing, and what's even weirder was that the calls that Marie received were from a phone booth near her house. The police were starting to wonder if this person was also responsible for the odd fire incidents. Now they had a puzzle to solve, and they finally decided to talk to Marie about it. They had suspicions that maybe she was behind all the strange fires in an attempt to get insurance money. They wondered if she made the phone calls to make it look like she was not the only victim. They asked her if she had anything to do with all these incidents. However, they made a mistake. They didn't gather enough evidence against Marie before questioning her. Marie, being clever, was able to convince the police that she was innocent. She told them it could be someone targeting both her and Doris because they were both widows. So, without any solid proof against her, they had no other choice but to let her go. But the question still remained, were all these incidents really just a bunch of coincidences, or was there a darker plot at play? By 1978, 3 years had gone by since Frank's passing, and Mike and Terry had shifted back to Florida. Marie had used up all of the life insurance money. She'd also fallen behind on her loan payments. Meanwhile, Mike, who was in Florida at the time, started getting demanding letters from creditors. Being suspicious of Marie's actions, he decided to visit her in Anniston to figure out what was going on. He believed Marie was responsible for this financial mess and wanted to confront her about the money. However, Marie had a different story. She told Mike that the money was tied up in some stocks, but promised to go to the bank with them the next morning to get the money. So the following morning, they had breakfast together, and then they headed to the bank, but things didn't go as planned.
After breakfast that morning, he got, I won't say violently ill, but he got ill. Vomiting, gastritis type symptoms. And the thought was she had poisoned him at breakfast that morning. I don't think he was ever tested. If he was, I'm not aware of it. And I'm not sure he could ever bring himself to admit that.
Mike returned to Florida without receiving the money from Marie, but the question still remained, how did Mike, who was perfectly fine in the morning, suddenly fall ill after breakfast with Marie? Meanwhile, Marie took out a $25,000 life insurance policy on Carol. But after getting this insurance, a series of strange events began to unfold in Carol's life. Carol, who had graduated from high school at the age of 19 in 1979, began attending Jacksonville State University and rented her own apartment to start her new life. However, despite Carol's objections, Marie moved in with her and also decided to make some changes to the apartment, including buying new furniture and other necessary items. To pay for these changes, Marie wrote a check, but when she tried to use it, the check bounced. In April 1979, for the first time, Carol started feeling sick at a party. As the night went on, she began to feel nauseated, but she didn't let it ruin her fun and tried to enjoy the party. However, the next day, her nausea got much worse and she had to leave church early and ended up vomiting in the parking lot. When she returned home, she found out that her grandmother, Carrie Hilly, had fainted at church and was in the hospital, so Carol went to the hospital with her mother Marie and felt sick there as well. After taking some medicine, she started to feel better temporarily, but this relief didn't last long. During that summer, Carol's health kept deteriorating, and every time she visited a doctor, they couldn't pinpoint the exact problem, but they used to provide some medications to help alleviate her symptoms. Unfortunately, these treatments didn't seem to work for Carol, and despite her frequent hospital stays, her condition continued to worsen.
We're talking about severe muscle spasms, seizing of the muscles, particularly in the abdominal wall, gastrointestinal pain. She might have contractions in her arms. Sight becomes blurred, tremendous headaches, not being able to feel, for instance. She has a numbness throughout her body, and this unquenchable thirst. This is a huge recipe for just a torturous day.
When Marie went to see her daughter in the hospital, she brought some baby food because Carol was having trouble eating regular food due to her illness. However, alongside the baby food, Marie also brought some kind of injection with her.
One of the relatives had walked into the bedroom while Marie had a syringe in her hand, and she told them, says, the doctors have told me to give Carol some injections.
After those mysterious injections, Carol's health kept getting worse, and doctors still couldn't find a clear reason for her sickness. At this point, they started to suspect that her home environment might be a source of her stress, which was psychosomatic, and this stress could be causing physical symptoms that didn't have a direct physical cause. On the other hand, Carol was exhausted from constantly battling her illness, both emotionally and physically. Her condition made her feel deeply depressed and hopeless, and one day, overwhelmed by all the pain, she tried to end her suffering by swallowing a bottle of Tylenol in a desperate attempt to end her life. But thankfully, it was unsuccessful. After this, Dr. Warren Darrell advised Marie to take Carol to see Dr. John Elmore, a psychiatrist in Birmingham. Following this advice, they traveled to Birmingham, about 60 miles west of Anniston. At Dr. John's recommendation, Carol was admitted to the psychiatric ward at Caraway Methodist Hospital. However, Carol, confined to the hospital, had no idea that her mother was becoming more deeply involved in her own deceitful actions and lies during this time. Marie found herself in trouble when the checks she wrote for Carol's apartment furniture and insurance premiums, including those on Carol's life policy, bounced. Because of this, the bank took legal action against her, leading to her arrest. However, she was quickly released on bail and was back at the hospital within hours. Despite trying different treatments, Carol's health kept declining, and anyone could see how frail she'd become. She'd lost a lot of weight and fell to a mere 87 pounds. Carol's terrible condition reminded Frank's sister, Frida, of her brother, and she couldn't help but draw a troubling connection between Carol's deteriorating health and Frank's sickness before he passed away. She recalled how Marie used to give Frank some injections to help with his nausea back then. At the time, she'd found those injections quite strange, but didn't think much of it. Now, with Carol going through a similar ordeal, she grew suspicious. So she made a call to Mike, her nephew, to ask if Marie had given Carol those same injections. However, Mike had no knowledge of this, so to uncover the truth, he decided to talk to Carol directly. During the phone call with Mike, Marie was actually present in the room with Carol. When Mike inquired if Marie had been giving Carol injections, Carol initially hesitated and said no. However, her uneasy response made it clear to Mike that something wasn't right. So we pressed her again, and this time, Carol took a deep breath and confessed, yes, Marie had been giving her injections. This admission raised a lot of suspicion in Mike's mind, but he didn't rush to conclusions. Instead, he decided to call the regional medical center to verify whether Marie had the authorization to administer those injections to Carol. To everyone's shock, the doctor on the other end of the line categorically stated that Marie was absolutely not permitted to give Carol any injections. The situation escalated when Dr. John, who was overseeing Carol's treatment at Caraway Methodist Hospital, asked Marie not to visit Carol due to some medical problems. This made Marie extremely anxious, and in response, she decided to remove Carol from Caraway Methodist, claiming that she was taking her to either the Mayo Clinic or Ochsner Hospital in New Orleans for better care. She said that Carol had been at Caraway Methodist for 3 weeks without any improvement. So they spent a night at a motel, and the following day, Carol was admitted to the University of Alabama Hospital in Birmingham, where Dr. Brian Thompson took charge of her medical case. The next day, while Carol was resting in the hospital, Marie received an unexpected visitor. It was Lieutenant Gary Carroll, who'd come to arrest Marie once again, this time in the hospital due to the fraudulent checks. However, when he saw Carol's frail and worsening condition, he was truly shocked and concerned.
Well, I saw Carol at the hospital. Of course, I had seen her before at the house during all these so-called problems they were having. Carol was pitiful when I went to the hospital.
On September 15, 1979, Lieutenant Gary arrested Marie in Birmingham for check fraud. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, as Carol was getting ready for bed, a doctor passing by noticed something unusual. Carol's fingernails didn't look like they were affected by a common illness. They turned a concerning shade of blue.
Off when you observe the fingernails in individuals that have been exposed to arsenic, particularly over a long period of time, there are these little lines or striations that create on the surface of the nails. This does not happen under any other circumstances. And so at that point in time, the doctor knew that something was up, that more than likely she had been exposed to arsenic.
Yes, you heard that right. Carol had an alarmingly high level of arsenic in her body. To confirm this, the Alabama Department of Forensic Science checked Carol's hair and performed other tests. In the end, the toxicology results were shocking. They revealed that Carol had over 100 times the usual amount of arsenic in her system, which was a major red flag.
Carol was chronically subjected to arsenic over a period of time, and it has become essentially infused into her cells.
Upon hearing his sister's diagnosis, Mike wasn't going to let this mystery slide. He penned a detailed letter to Ralph Phillips, the Calhoun County coroner, recounting the rapid decline of his father and suspecting that his mother, Marie, was behind it all. He requested a thorough investigation into the matter, and Lieutenant Gary Carroll, taking these concerns seriously, conducted a 2-hour interview with Marie on September 26, 1979. At first, Marie tried to deflect accusations and pointed fingers elsewhere. But with skilled questioning, Gary managed to get her to confess. She admitted to giving injections to Carol, both at home and in the hospital, and had done the same for her mother and Frank. She insisted that these were just medications, and she'd obtained one of Carol's injections from a woman named Mrs. Hill at Caraway Methodist Hospital. However, they couldn't find any trace of such a woman at the hospital, and this raised doubts. Soon it became clear that Marie was indeed involved in Frank's murder and was attempting to poison Carol in the same way. But why was Marie doing all of this? What drove her to kill her own family? The developments that followed were swift and shocking, unlike the slow agony Carol had endured. On October 3, 1979, the revelation that Marie had likely been poisoning her daughter confirmed what many friends and family had suspected. Mike was convinced that his father, Frank, had suffered from arsenic poisoning given the similarity of symptoms. Frank, during the peak of his illness, had complained about a swollen red pinprick in his upper arm and claimed that Marie was giving him shots on the doctor's orders. He'd been unwell for some time, and it seemed that Marie might have added arsenic to his food or drink, as it's clear and odorless. To establish the truth, the coroner ordered a remarkable event. A crowd gathered at the Forest Lawn Garden Cemetery on the east side of town on October 3, 1979, to witness when police exhumed Frank Hilly's body. Strangely, Frank's body showed minimal signs of decomposition despite being buried for 4 years. Arsenic has a preservative effect on body tissues, which explains this unusual preservation. Investigators also found traces of arsenic in the remains of Marie's mother, Lucille, and her mother-in-law, Carrie Hilly, after exhumation of their bodies. The story took an even more sinister turn when the remains of Sonia Gibson, an 11-year-old friend of Carol's who had died under unclear circumstances in 1974, were exhumed and examined. But only a normal amount of arsenic was found in her body. Sonia was one of the neighborhood children who had fallen ill after drinking beverages provided during visits to the Hilly household. Two police officers who'd visited the Hilly household during a domestic disturbance also reported feeling ill with nausea and stomach cramps after consuming coffee offered by Marie. Even during the investigation, a search of the hotel room where Marie had been staying while her daughter was hospitalized revealed a shocking discovery. Inside a cosmetic case, they found a small bottle containing a clear and odorless liquid, which, upon testing, turned out to be arsenic. Furthermore, investigators came across a bottle of rat poison hidden among cans of baby food in Marie's home, and it was also found to contain arsenic. This provided further evidence of her sinister intentions and actions. It was clear that Marie had been poisoning numerous people with small amounts of arsenic for an extended period. On October 9, 1979, while Marie was already in custody for fraud charges, Lieutenant Gary arrested her for the murder of her husband and the attempted murder of her daughter. However, in the following month, which was November 1979, she was once again released from custody after posting bail. 6 days after posting bail, Marie's lawyer, Wilfred Elaine, went to her hotel room to discuss her upcoming trial. However, when he entered, he discovered that all of Marie's belongings were still there, but she was nowhere to be found. Instead, he found a note on the table which said that Marie had been kidnapped and warned him not to try to find her. Marie had vanished, taking clothes in a car, and was now on the run, crossing state borders to evade the law. This triggered a nationwide manhunt that would continue for years as she left behind her sick daughter, debts, and legal troubles. Now, Marie had all her plans ready, and she decided to leave Alabama behind and start a new life in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, using the name Robbie Hannon. In 1980, she met a man named John Greenleaf Homan III at a bar, and he was immediately captivated by her. Robbie, in her 40s and quite glamorous, didn't take long to start dating John. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and one day, Robbie shared her dream of living in a snowy cabin in New Hampshire with John. They decided to make this dream come true, so they got married on May 29, 1981, and together they moved to Marlow, New Hampshire. In Marlow, Robbie found a job as a secretary in the town of Keene. Everything seemed perfect, but this was just the beginning of a complex web of deception. Marie, now living as Robbie, had everything under control in her new life with John in New Hampshire. But in 1982, she sprung the final phase of her plan. Out of the blue, she told John and her coworkers that she had a rare blood disease and needed to return to her home state of Texas for a special treatment. During this announcement, she even introduced them to her twin sister named Terry Martin, claiming she also wanted to spend time with her. For 3 long months, no one heard a word from Robbie, leaving them all in suspense. Then, unexpectedly, one day John received a call from Terry, who would unravel a series of shocking events.
And while in Texas, she changed her appearance. Finally called John, told him that Marie had gotten sick while she was there in Texas and had died.
Upon hearing of Robbie's death, John wanted to make funeral arrangements in Texas. However, Terry, who was actually Marie in disguise, told him that Robbie's last wish was for her body to be donated for study at a university. This meant there was no need for a trip to Texas. Terry and John stayed in contact, and as they got to know each other over the phone, John expressed a desire to meet her in person. Terry agreed and suggested they have their first date in Florida. Meanwhile, Marie had transformed herself once more, this time as Terry, working to change her appearance and even dyeing her hair blonde. When John met Terry, he was immediately smitten with her and they began dating. Living there, Terry also took up the same job that Robbie had before. However, her carefully crafted plan was starting to unravel. Her co-workers at the office weren't entirely convinced that Terry was a separate person. They had doubts about her story and suspected that Robbie might have faked her death, now pretending to be a twin sister who didn't really exist. So in January 1983, they decided to reach out to the local authorities. Detective Bob Hardy from the Keene Police Department took on the case, interviewing Terry's co-workers and making inquiries. No matter where he looked, something just didn't add up in the obituary and the stories surrounding Terry. The New Hampshire State Police added an intriguing twist to the story. They mentioned a woman named Carol Manning, who matched the description of Terry Martin, was wanted for a bank robbery. Suspicion was growing around Terry, but they soon realized she wasn't Carol Manning. Instead, they believed she might be Terry Lynn Clifton, another fugitive. However, in all the confusion, the truth finally came to light on January 12, 1983, when they took her in for questioning at Book Press. When asked for her name, she replied with something puzzling: Audrey Marie Hilly. She claimed to be wanted in Alabama for bad check charges. When her name was checked in the system, it quickly became clear that she was indeed Marie Hilly, and her troubles extended beyond just check charges in Alabama. The authorities brought Marie back to Anniston on January 19, 1983. By this point, another serious charge had been added: the murder of Frank Hilly. Her bond was set at a hefty $320,000, and this time, no one came forward to pay it. Carol Hilly, who had physically recovered from her ordeal, had mixed emotions but was eager to see her mother. During their jail visit, Marie cried, hugged Carol, and professed her love, claiming she missed her terribly during her time on the run. However, she provided no explanation for the poisonings. Despite this, Marie and Carol continued to meet and talk frequently. Carol desperately wanted to believe that her mother hadn't meant to harm her, which concerned the prosecutors. But the grim truth was that Marie had killed her husband, her mother, and her mother-in-law, and had attempted to kill Carol as well. Marie's trial began on May 31st, 1983.
It became a matter of deep interest in the community when we approached trial. I had one beautician, hairdresser, tell me that I had ruined her business because she didn't have any customers the week we started that trial because they were all at the courthouse. It was really almost surreal. We called in extra security. When the trial started, we actually had a line of people, mostly female. They were mostly older ladies. The speculation was that not only the interest in the case itself, but they were down there to hear some of the details that might have been titillating as far as some of the people Marie had worked for.
Marie and her lawyer appeared to be confident that the evidence against her was weak and circumstantial, meaning it wasn't strong enough to prove her guilt definitively. They believed she might be released from custody soon due to this perceived weakness in the case.
Lose your parents is one thing. To have one of them try to kill you is something else.
During the 3 years her mother Marie had been a fugitive, Carol had moved from denial to a dawning realization that her own mother had murdered her father and had tried to kill her.
During the trial, Marie's son Mike and daughter Carol were important witnesses. They took the stand and gave testimony against their own mother, speaking about what they knew regarding the case. They shared information and their perspective with the court to help build the case against Marie. Carol went through a significant emotional journey during the trial. At first, she couldn't accept the idea that her own mother, Marie, had committed these terrible acts. However, as the trial progressed and evidence was presented, Carol eventually faced the painful truth that her mother was responsible for the deaths of her father, her friend, her grandmothers, and others close to her. This realization was difficult for her to accept, but became clear as the trial unfolded. On June 7, 1983, Marie was found guilty of murdering Frank and attempting to murder Carol, and she was given a life sentence plus an additional 20 years in prison. However, the story doesn't stop there. After serving less than 4 years of her sentence in the woman's prison 90 miles away from Anniston, she was allowed a 3-day furlough so she could visit her husband, John Homan. John and Marie spent some time in a motel in Anniston during her furlough, but John had to leave for a while to attend some work. So he asked Marie to wait for him, but when he returned a few hours later, she had mysteriously disappeared. This sudden disappearance of a convicted murderer understandably sent shockwaves through the community. People were not only worried about their own safety, but also the safety of their families, given that someone with a violent past was now on the loose. One night on February 26, 1987, a woman from Blue Mountain in Anniston found the injured and bloody woman collapsed on the back deck of her house. Thinking that the stranger might be a homeless person in need of medical help, she quickly called the police and an ambulance and both arrived shortly after and realized that the sick woman was none other than Marie Hilly herself. They rushed her to the hospital, but Marie passed away at the age of 53 due to hypothermia. According to doctors, she was already severely ill 4 days before, but finally died when it became unbearable and her body was completely exhausted. It was a surprising end to a story filled with mystery and crime. Carol had now fully recovered and was embracing her future with hope. Meanwhile, Mike and Terry were starting a fresh chapter in their lives, especially with the arrival of their baby boy. Slowly but surely, the Hilly family was finding their way back to a sense of normalcy. However, the pain inflicted by Marie's actions would always be a haunting memory, one that could never truly be forgotten. What are your thoughts on this case? Why was Marie killing her own family? Was it really for the money, or was something more sinister at play? We'd love to hear from you. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled for the next mystery to unfold.